you can have the best plan in the world, but as soon as the ball kicks off for kickoff, the game quickly changes. And the sooner you can see certain things, and this is where I think we've been able to do that this year, especially making changes either to secure the result, or there's been times where we've gone behind where we've made changes, and most of the time they seem to have worked well, where we've been able to positively come away with the result. Go and get as many experiences and learn as much as you can. If you can get to know the people you're working with, it really helps both build trust and the relationship that you have, and then you can hopefully really make a difference in the learning.
So hello captains of Armband, welcome to our today's show. Welcome to another episode of Short Corners, where we interview footballers, managers, coaches, analysts, scouts, directors and owners of various football clubs to bring the different aspects of the game closer to you. So if you are a football enthusiast just like us, and love to learn from football personalities, make sure to subscribe to our channel. And today with us, we have Mr. Des Buckingham, as we promised, the head coach of Indian Super League club Mumbai City FC, as well as the Shield winner of last year. And his team is also playing the AFC Champions League, representing India at the highest stage of Asian club football. So, Mr. Buckingham, how have you been?
I've been good, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Just been enjoying spending some time with the family, who I haven't seen in just over a year. So it's been a good couple of weeks.
So, sir, I hope you are having a blast there with your family. So, now coming to all the sorts of talking points and all those things. So before you joined Mumbai City FC as the head coach in 2021, you kept a close touch with club's former head coach Sergio Lobera and followed the team for a couple of months. So how did that help you once you took over from him, keeping in mind the club had lost 5 of their very key players during that time?
I think it's the benefit and the beauty of being part of the City Football Group. My experience in Melbourne was one of the clubs that the group own. And coming to Mumbai, as part of the network that we have, we speak to each other. We were speaking to each other. It wasn't just Sergio. There was other coaches in the groups and the other clubs that we used to engage quite regularly. It just happens that Sergio and myself shared more messages maybe than we did else with others. So it was good that there was some familiarity of sorts when you come in, because you know that not only did the team won the double the year before, but you know that they've been coached extremely well, and the work that Sergio had done, it was about coming in and just trying to build upon that. And for Sergio to stay within the group initially and go to China was great. But yeah, to lose 5 of those key starting players, and it wasn't just 5 key starting players, it was the experience and the leadership, I suppose, that they had as well. It took some time to kind of get where we wanted to get to, but we set out quite early in that season to try and build for what we wanted to achieve, and we started that in January to make sure that when we approached this season, we were able to do a lot of what we actually set out to end up doing. So that was the pleasing thing.
And also there was a huge expectation by taking over someone like a Sergio Lobera, and Mumbai City FC started their 21-22 ISL season quite brilliantly. After a few bad results though, they failed to recover quite quickly, but eventually missed out on the playoffs. But what were some of the key takeaways from that season as the head coach? Because a lot of fans already started to say the team was looking like a very compact unit by the end of that season. And we all saw what happened the next season. So what were some of the key takeaways from that?
The key thing for me was planning and making sure that, I only actually arrived into India 3 weeks before the season started, and we had players still arriving in quarantine a week before that first game. So, that takes time in itself. And then it was making sure that, talk about depth, it's not just a starting 11 is good, and we had a very good starting 11, but it's making sure that we have some depth. And that was the key thing. And when I look at our games, certainly from last year, if there was a need to change the starting 11, or if there was a need to change the personnel within the game to make an impact, either to secure the result or to go after the result, that's something that was very important. But it was about making sure that we recruit players, not necessarily the best players in the league, of which some of them were in the end, but it was about recruiting players that fitted the style of football that we wanted to play. And that's been the key to this year.
After that season, Mumbai City FC traveled to Abu Dhabi for a training camp ahead of the 2022 AFC Champions League, and what followed was a remarkable year-long run. First brilliant displays in the Champions League. As an Indian, we never thought we will see something like that. And then a runner-up finish in the Durand Cup that year. And then the club lifted the 2022-23 ISL Winners' Shield. So how do you believe both of you and your team have evolved throughout this past year?
Yeah, I think the modern game, you have to evolve. I was brought into the club to make sure it was built behind the scenes from a football sense, the same way any CFG club is. And, what I'll quite happily say now is that what's been put in place over the last 2 years, we've got somebody like a Rustin Griffiths that's come from Melbourne, and he will attest to the fact that what we do in Mumbai is pretty much the same as what they now do in Melbourne, on and off the field. So it was about making sure we can put all those foundations in place. Because if we can ensure that we get some consistency, both in terms of our playing group and our signings, and making sure we retain the core group of players who can play the way we want, and then also add some quality to that suit the way we want to play, that consistency for us was the most important thing. So, yeah, it's been a combination of a few things, but it's been a very, very good 12 months, and one where we said we want to be successful, in terms of how we play and how we perform. And if we can do that, we'll put ourselves in strong positions to challenge for different things at different points of the season.
Mumbai City FC's run to the ISL's Winner's Shield of 2022-2023 was one of the best ever in the history of Indian League football, as your team went on to 8-game winning streak and a 16-game unbeaten streak last season. Also keeping in mind you had some of very tough fixtures where the team just blew away the opponents. So what were the highlights of the league season for you? And as the head coach, how do you reflect on the campaign? Because sometimes a season like this in Indian football is still unprecedented, especially in the ISL, where consistency becomes a very key issue. But for your team, it was a very, very convincing ISL Shield winner victory path. So what will be your takeaway on this?
Yeah, I think firstly it was one of excitement. I think we started off the season with a wonderful 3-3 draw against Hyderabad. And it probably took us 3 or 4 games to find, we changed a few things in terms of how we wanted to play this season. And it probably took until the game when we were away at Kerala Blasters, where I still think that first 45 minutes against Kerala away was our best 45 minutes of the season. But that seemed to be the game where the players, it clicked and the players understood it. We got it. And from that moment forwards, we almost rode a wave, if you will. And to see some of the performances that not just the team put in, but the individuals within that. And it was almost, we've got some good individuals, but it was what was exciting watching from the sideline, I'm sure on the TV, was the way that the unselfishness of the individuals that contributed towards what the team were able to showcase consistently over that, what turned into an 18-game unbeaten run that secured the Shield.
And also about that Kerala Blasters game, I remember there is always one talking point of the season where you see the team and say, this team is looking like a contender. And that 45 minutes, nobody ever thought that Manjampara will be silenced. And it was. And also, whenever some guys come to our podcast, Mumbai City FC fan, they always talk about a lot of things. But that Kerala Blasters game was very special for them. And we also have a fan question for you.
Hello, Des. My name is Ashwin Naruna, and I am one of the members of the West Coast Brigade. My question to you is, what do you think would be the role of Indian players in the upcoming ISL season, considering that this will be more longer than the previous years? And what do you think would be your strategy or your tactics towards developing the Indian players for the upcoming Asian level matches, like both the Champions League and the Asian Games for the Indian national team? So I would definitely like to hear your take on it.
I think when you look at I've said all along, we want the best Indian players at our club, and I'm convinced we've got a lot of them now, both seniors, but definitely the younger players. We've shown that we don't just want to be a club that say we want to develop young players. I think now, if you look past over the last 18 months in particular, the players that have come on and come through and that maybe weren't even on a team sheet. I can name people like Fuba, Metab, who has gone on to have a wonderful season. Apuya, of course, was already there, but has gone on to develop his game. I look at people like Chante, who wasn't getting a start at Chennai, but has come and now just walked away with the golden ball. And, there's many players that I think the foreign players often get a lot of the attention and sometimes rightly so because of what they're able to produce. But when you look across our team now, it's not just a young one. It's a young one that's made up of a very strong Indian core that I'm very pleased with, both in terms of how they developed, both in terms of how we've been able to retain them. And I'm very excited about what we can continue doing with them in the future. And I think the Super Cup was a fantastic shop window to show that, regardless we have foreigners or we don't, players that we have, continue to try and play the way they do, and they're very capable. If you can trust them and put them in a supportive environment, they've already showcased that they're capable of doing that.
One of the biggest takeaways from the Super Cup was that if you have a good squad, Indian squad, you can play in any tournament. So when the Super Cup finished, what was your reaction and seeing the squad played so cohesively, got good results, somehow couldn't qualify because of the technicalities and all that. But what was your key takeaway after the end of the Super Cup? Because a lot of the fans and a lot of the football fraternity were shocked that Mumbai City FC fielded in all 11 Indian players and they not had a single foreigner in the whole squad. So what was your takeaway from the Super Cup and the 11 Indian players giving it the all on the pitch?
I thought it was an opportunity to see, could we do it, firstly? And it was a second one to give more playing time to those that maybe haven't had too much in the season, to also put ourselves in a good position to see whether or not these players could continue next year with us and also what they were capable of. And, we very rarely talk or hardly talk at all in our group about winning or the result. It's always around our performance. And we've now got 2 years worth of data or 2 years worth of work that we've done with this group, and we've got benchmarks we tried to hit, internal measures. We've shown more often than not, if we can hit those internal measures as a group during a game, most of the time the result is positive, whether it's 3 points or one. And when I look across the 3 Super Cup games we had, in all 3 games, our performance measures were as high and as good as they were in the ISL. The one thing that football obviously throws at you, we played Northeast, and we hit our performance measures, but unfortunately we had quite a few opportunities that just didn't go in the back of the net, and we didn't get the result that would have taken us through. So as long as we continue to hit those performance measures and the players continue to stick true to what we do, whether it's Indian or foreign, or ideally the mix of both, we'll put ourselves in a strong position to perform.
Now, coming a bit on the personal note, you are a well-known figure for developing talents. During your 10-year tenure as a youth coach at Oxford United, you helped 24 player progress from the youth team level to the pro level. So the same pattern is repeating in Mumbai City FC, as a lot of the Indian talents have turned into established names under your coaching. So what are the aspects of player development that remain constant throughout the different age groups and cultures?
Yeah, I mean, my time at Oxford was wonderful. I spent 10 years there. And so to see a development pathway, I think when they start off as 9 and 10-year-olds, to share that journey with them and watch them progress and develop was a wonderful thing. And it was 24 that did go on to play professional football during that time. And then I look at the time we spent in the time we spent in New Zealand with the young under-20s and the national teams. And we had players like Sarpreet Singh, who played the World Cup with us, and then got signed by Bayern Munich. And then there's others, Libby Kakache, who again was a local player in Wellington, who got signed and is now playing in Serie A for Empoli. So there's a long and strong history there of developing young players. The key thing for me, and I don't know if this helps me being a young coach as well, I'm still only 38, but been coaching for 21 years now, which is quite scary when you say it that way. It's just understanding the different needs and giving people the time, and I'm trying to understand, as corny as it may sound, everybody's different. Everyone's got different ways that they want to do things. And we give a lot of time to each of the players that we have in our group. And we always have done in any environment I've worked in, whether it was Oxford, whether it was New Zealand, whether it was in Melbourne or now in India. If you can get to know the people you're working with, it really helps both build trust in the relationship that you have. And then you can hopefully really make a difference in the learning that you spend time trying to help develop them. And that's been a real key part, as well as making sure you have good people around you. And I'm fortunate in Mumbai and the environments I've had, I've been supported by a wonderful staff group who are very good at what they do. And then you also leverage the experience of the players that you have, because we've got, again, Indian and foreign, some wonderful experiences across our group. And it doesn't always have to come from me. Again, there's players in our group that know a lot more than me. And if we can harness that and extract that and use that to better, and I'll use an example with, young Apuya, who's been fortunate to play alongside Ahmed Jahul for the last 2 seasons. The development that would have really helped. He's a good player, but to play along somebody with the experiences and somebody that was keen to help develop him as well, that will really help jumpstart and push him a little bit further maybe than it would if he didn't have him alongside him. So a long-winded answer to that question, but yeah, hopefully that gives you a bit of an insight.
I once had a podcast with Mr. Josh Bidnash, the under-15 coach of Crystal Palace, and he told me one thing, which was very interesting, is that when you coach a youth team or a youth player, the most important thing is the one-on-one communication with the player and having a special relation where you know the player on an individual level. So do you think that reaching out to every single player and having a bit of personal touch to relation helps in nurturing the youth players? Because sometimes in today's time, the youth players have a lot of, let's say, distractions. So do you think have a personal touch helps it get her to reach out to them in terms of football and non-footballing things as well?
I think there's a saying that, what is it? They don't care what you know unless they know you care. And I think that's true, not just for young players now. I think that's the same for senior players. So it doesn't matter whether you're the youngest or the oldest in our group, we still give you the same attention that you may want. And I always look back at people that not inspired me, but intrigued me and got me interested in coaching. And you asked me what my best coach that I've ever worked with was. And I think if anyone was to ask themselves who's your best teacher that they've ever had, very rarely would they say they're the best because they taught me how to play football, or they taught me tactics, or they taught me technique. Very often it's they were the best person because the softer skills, it's how they made you feel, it's how, their sense of humor, it's it's all those softer skills. Now the football certainly will come on top of that, but by creating those environments where the player can be relaxed, can be themselves, that for me is key, because then, hopefully what I know I can transmit and transfer to that player a lot easier than if we don't have that.
During your tenure at Oxford United, you have worked with Chris Wilder, one of the biggest names. So what are the things that you learned from him? What are the things have you seen up close from him? Can you tell us a bit about Chris Wilder?
I can. I see him last night at the League Managers Association Awards. So it was nice to, I hadn't seen him in maybe 5 or 6 years. So it was really nice to see him again. But, I was 27 and I spent 26 I would have been, and spent 4 years working with Chris in that first team environment. And he is one of a few, if not the only coach that I think has taken a team up from one division to another, all the way from the conference to the Football League, to 2 to 1 to 1 to the Championship, and from the Championship, of course, with Sheffield United to the Premier League. So a hugely successful and experienced coach. But I was so fortunate to work with Chris. I think his man management skills, how he was really able to, all the things I've just spoken about, he was fantastic at. But not only that, his football knowledge was as good as anyone I've ever come across. And that's where I think, when I look back across my coaching journey, as young as I am, but as old as the experience gives me, that's the one thing that I've been extremely fortunate to be in and around, which is people like Chris Wilder, people like over in New Zealand, Ernie Merrick. I've been so lucky, and as I am now in Mumbai, to be surrounded by the people I am, but also the City Football Group, who continue to provide development opportunities and learning and experiences, which hopefully make me better, which in turn hopefully makes the players and the team a lot better.
In one of your previous podcasts, I listened to it very carefully, but one thing I liked that you talked that players want to be able to do what they are capable of doing. So how have you developed your game and game structures over the years, keeping this in mind?
Yeah, I think my background initially was in teaching. So I spent 4 years as a teacher I was 21. And I think a lot of teaching is coaching. I think there's a massive crossover in terms of those two things, because the biggest thing in teaching is trying to work out different ways that people learn. Because if they can learn it, they understand it. If they understand it, they can do it. And then you don't have to continually remind people of things. And for me, that's coaching. And quite often, we want to get players maybe from here to here, but they don't need all the steps. They may be missing one key thing. And I think that's the best thing for me, is trying to find out what is it they're missing, and what you don't need to give them everything. So when I look at how we develop things, and that's, the first 12 months of my time at the club, I think we spent a lot of time maybe embedding a lot of the foundation as to what's been seen this year, certainly, but that around behind almost a teaching framework, getting the players to understand how we play, getting them to understand how they operate, so they don't need me or the other coaching staff continually telling them, because in a game there's many different situations and they need to find solutions. And if they can understand and they've learned what we've been working on and what that looks like, they'll be in a much better place, I should say, to make better decisions that are going to get them out of those potential problems or take advantage of situations which they may not have seen before. So a bit of teaching background, which has helped then go into the coaching and has hopefully then allowed them to build their knowledge base that's allowed them to showcase their football.
So what a brilliant correlation between teaching and how teaching can impact football as well. Sir, a very insightful answer. So this is a question that's very tricky in this regard, that generally during ISL games, Mumbai City FC looks to dominate the possessions and they have done it brilliantly. But during the AFC Champions League matches, you were comfortable letting the opposition have most of the ball possession, and despite of that, Mumbai City FC always looked proactive, which is sometimes not the thing when you have a lot less possession. So how do you mix your principles with the game-related situations as well?
Yeah, I draw on the experiences of I took New Zealand to the World Cup with the age group teams and then the Olympics when we qualified there. And I think, we can always challenge ourselves. And I've said this all along. We want to be a club that go and play an attacking brand of football. We want to outscore teams. We want to have more possession, and we want to play some really exciting football where players can express themselves. And we will always go out to try and win the game. As a coach, it's not in my makeup and certainly not part of our DNA at Mumbai to sit back and defend to start with. But then there are times where you play, and you have to be realistic at times where you come up against opposition that they have far greater resource, far greater reach. The value of their squad and the players that they have arguably can be better than yours, but that doesn't mean they are better than you. It's making sure that you're very clear on, your game plan and your approach, and you have to really take advantage of your strengths whilst also, maybe nullifying theirs and tweaking your game plan, because, playing ISL is a challenge in itself, but certainly going to the Champions League, when you come up against certain teams and certain players, it's can be very different and very challenging. But the pleasing thing was how clear players seemed to be during those games, and what they executed and were able to come away with, both in terms of performance, but certainly results in that competition, was a wonderful thing for everybody.
ISL is sometimes a very unpredictable league. We never know how the opponents will turn up. One day they are not looking so good, but the next day when you play against them, they are in this supreme form. So, as we said, all the famous coaches in world football have said having a game model is very important, and being proactive also helps. But sometimes you have to be reactive also, seeing the opponent's tactics. So, how difficult is it in that sense in ISL? Actually, the difference between all the teams are very less. So how do you see that as experience, and how having a settled game model and a very clear principle helps the team in playing a league like ISL where all the teams are neck and neck in terms of quality?
Yeah, I think the first one for us, and this is where, working in the group and certainly having the trust of Mumbai over the 2 seasons, to have the time to implement your ideas. And that it does take time. People take time to learn things, especially in team sports, and understand their roles within certain parts. And I use young Chante as an example where, when we started doing what we were doing, he struggled. He found it tough because he wanted to be a player that was always getting towards the ball. So we would speak about his position and how important it was, not just for him, but for others to operate in certain spaces. So I think making sure that you've got a squad that can push each other day in, day out. They train together all the time. And what I was very happy with this year was the ability for us to have almost 2 players for every position that were good players, and they challenged each other on it. And the good thing was, if we needed to make change, whether it was through performance or because we felt that one player may get a slight advantage, we were able to do that several times. And when you can drive that, that's not, it's an environment which promotes development, but also promotes competition. And that's a very delicate balance at times, but we had a good group of people that were able to do that. And then it's my job, or my staff's job, to make sure, firstly, we try and get our game plan right, because we will tweak things and change things, only small things, not much, from game to game, because we know teams will try and stop us doing certain things. And we think we may be able to do certain things to them that we weren't able to do the week before. So we have to try and make sure we get that right. And then the biggest thing for me, it's managing and coaching in the game, because you can have the best plan. You can have the best plan in the world, but as soon as the ball kicks off for kickoff, the game quickly changes. And the sooner you can see certain things, and this is where I think we've been able to do that this year, especially making changes either to secure the result, or there's been times where we've gone behind where we've made changes. And most of the time they seem to have worked well, where we've been able to positively come away with a result, but then coaching in the game. So it's probably those three things.
How does the scouting takes place at Mumbai City FC, and how does data play a role in that? Also, keeping in mind Mumbai City FC is one of those teams who know how to get the best out of the players, be it an experienced players. And one thing that I very much personally like of Mumbai City FC, how much they have invested in the youth, be it Apuya, be it Gyamar Nikum, and there are a lot of names. Just I'm naming these two. And does your principal, having worked with youth set up for so many times, does that also impact in terms of and helps you in getting the young players and try to nurture them? Because we have seen the growth of both Apuya. We are interested to see how Gyamar Nikum goes, but how does the whole scouting process go at Mumbai City FC? Because Mumbai City FC is notoriously well known for getting the best out of their players and signing the best possible players from the market. So I will like to take your answer on this one.
Yeah, I think, we can talk about how we play. We've got a way that we want to play. And as part of that, we have profiles for players, so it's not just in our club, it's across our group, where if we want to play a certain style of football in certain positions, we're very clear on the type of player we look for. So when we go scouting and we look for players, generally that we try to make sure that they fit that profile, because what we have seen over both this club now and other clubs that I've worked in, if that player profile, if you can find a player that fits that profile, quite often they can come in and really have a positive impact for themselves, but also contribute to the team. And that's probably the biggest thing. So when I look at this year, I took Anuj may hit me here, but when I look at sort of recruitment for the upcoming season, there's some wonderful players in our league that are coming off of contract. And I'd argue that there's 2 or 3 very good and probably best players in the league, certainly foreign players, that you could arguably go after because they are excellent players. But the question has to then come, do they fit what we want to do? And do they fit the player profile? And do we actually need a player in that position? Because if you're just going to go and grab a player because they're the best player, you can either end up stockpile players, or you can end up stifling the opportunities, like you've mentioned, for young players coming through. And that then ties me, I suppose, into the last part, which is succession planning. It's one thing saying we want to be a club that's successful, and you can define success in many different ways, but one of ours is to develop and recruit the best young Indian players to come through and hopefully progress their careers beyond India. And if you put players in their positions, you can stifle that pathway to them. So when you mention the likes of an Apuya, Metab, Fuba, and young Nikum, we've obviously got Gurkara and Ayush now pushing through. It's making sure that you don't stifle their opportunities to play, because they need to develop. And if they don't develop, they end up sitting on the bench and don't get any game time. And that's no good to anybody. So yeah, it's making sure they fit the profile. It's making sure that then they don't stifle the pathways, and it's making sure that, they fit what we want to do.
As you said previously in the podcast, that having a leadership core helps. We have seen in all the top European clubs as well, they have a leadership core in a team which has as many as young prodigies like Mumbai City FC. How much does it help to have senior players like Rahul Bheke, someone like an Ahmed Jahu, and there are a lot of guys who have played in the Indian circuit for a long, long time. How much role does experience and having experienced players plays in a dressing room full of young players? Do they look up to them? And how does having a leadership core helps the club to move forward as well? I just had to ask this question.
Yeah, I think I'll start by, obviously, Ahmed Jahu and Mutada Fall are 2 players that have recently just moved on from us. And I can't speak highly enough of both of them. Certainly in my time since I arrived into India, the way that they are able to work with people, and the way certainly I've been so fortunate to work with them, then the relationships that are there for people that have been fortunate to spend any time with them, let alone on the field, but off the field. 2 wonderful leaders of teams, and I'll miss both of them. But I think it's a fine balance between, you need good experience, of course, and quite often experience comes with age. But we're also conscious of trying to reduce our average age down as well. So it's trying to find players that are experienced, but are not going beyond a certain age. But because what you don't want too many old players, and you don't want too many young players. But you need to find that fine balance where, yes, you want to really leverage that experience that those older players have, because if you can get the environment right, and I'll go back, Mutada Fall as an example. Mutada working with Metab or Roston Griffiths passing on advice about defending to Metab. It's such a wonderful thing and experience that I can give Metab as much as I can give him, but those two with their experiences, if it's done in the right way, which it certainly has been, will really help bring on those younger players. And that's what I've really enjoyed about our environment, certainly in the last 12 months, is how proactive and how keen people are to help each other. Even Alberto Nogueira, and how much time he actually spends in training, speaking to some of the younger players in his positions, and it's something that's constant in our group. So to answer your question again in a long-winded way, yes, experience is important, but it's making sure you get that fine balance between having the experience and not flooding too much one way or the other, to make sure you get that balance that's still going to allow you to play the way you want and hopefully be successful.
You once used the term Whanau, meaning an extended family or community. To explain the core idea of your team culture, how do you create this, keeping in mind the team environment and the differences in the players' cultural background, especially in a country like India, where it's like a amalgamation of so many cultures together?
Yeah, so I use the word Whanau, and it's a Maori word, an indigenous word from New Zealand, and it means family. And when you spend time in New Zealand, and if you're fortunate enough to be invited onto indigenous land, they take you to their whare, which is pretty much a very sacred piece of land, which is the house of a family. But that house represents historically where the family started, so it could go all the way back. But it represents what that family are and who they are and what they stand for and what's gone before, what's current, and what's hopefully going to come in the future. And there's some wonderful things that go on as part of that. If you're ever invited onto a marae, which is what that sits in, it's I'm not going to give it the justice it deserves here, but my point being, coming to India, it's about trying to learn from those types of practices. And the whole point around that was, it was identity. Who are we? What are we? So if somebody was to turn the TV on and you didn't have a badge on your shirt, they'd be able to say that's Mumbai City, because this is what we do and how we do it. So it was creating that sort of shared identity about, this is how we want to play. This is how you contribute towards us doing that. And building that brand, if you like, because when I look at, there's brands all around the world. If I said to you like Ferrari, or straight away, your mind goes to wherever it goes. And same with Coca-Cola. I can name you any brand. And it was almost just trying to build that brand and that identity, but it's being very clear on, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is how we do it. And that's, when I use that word whare, it's family, but it's what does that family represent and what does that actually mean?
How did the time at New Zealand shaped you as a person as well as a football coach?
Probably took me massively outside my comfort zone. I was fortunate to go on what they call a high performance coach accelerator program there, which I met many wonderful coaches, world-class coaches from other sports, and done a very deep dive. I mean, I think you got to a stage in my career, certainly, where yes, you think you can coach football, but there's always a lot more that you need to learn in terms of football, of course. But actually knowing yourself and understanding yourself, what are your values? What are your behaviors? Your morals? What do you stand for? So if somebody was to ask a player now about me, I'd like to think that if you ask 10 people, you get very similar answers. Whereas maybe before my time in New Zealand, I wasn't too sure what that may look like. So there's been a lot of time in the last 4 or 5 years just trying to get a very deep understanding of, who am I and what am I? And then what does that look like? Because I think if you're going to lead a team, which we've done now, that needs to be very clear and very evident to people. And that's been something that was huge for me in my time in New Zealand. Has certainly put me in a good position in Melbourne and now Mumbai.
In your 21 years of coaching career, you have coached in 3 different continents altogether. So you became the youngest head coach in the history of A-League during the 2016-17 season, and currently you are the youngest head coach in the Indian Super League itself. So what advice would you give to all the aspiring football coaches?
Go and get as many experiences and learn as much as you can, because I still go back to when I started out. I was doing 3 jobs a day. I was starting at 8 in the morning, doing a morning job, then doing an afternoon job, and then going to coach in the evening. And that went on for maybe 6 years. And you go through your coaching badges, but coaching badges will give you hopefully a structure around how to coach, but it's then the experiences that you have to go out and find your own way. And, I go back to, I've been fortunate with some of the coaches that I've worked for and with. I've never copied them, but I've certainly taken bits from, because you have to be yourself. You can't imitate somebody else. And I think when I was young, I did do that, but now, there's a better understanding of what I do and how, but there's always things to learn. And even last year, or 2 years ago, I finished off doing a master's degree in coaching just to try and stay in front of what is a very fast evolving game, because players know now more than they ever have done. And there's so much more access to football, whether it's on the TV or it's the 10-year-olds that are playing FIFA and able to set their training week and change formations. And I remember speaking to a 10-year-old and I spoke to him, I said, what position do you play? Now, again, for me at 10 years old, players are still trying to find, they should still rotate and try and find where they enjoy. But he looked at me and said, I play the holding role of a midfield 3. And then he talked me through what that looked like. So players, they know now, because they have access to far more. And I think the more that you can equip yourself with learning, I think the more you put yourself out there to gain experiences. I don't think you're ever ready for what's to come. You always, even in the job now, you try to get as much experience and as many tools as you can to do the job as well as you can. But like I said, even at 38 and the 21 years of coaching, there's still a lot more to learn. And that's the exciting part for me, but it's trying to stay in front of what's to come. And I'd like to think I've done as much as I can at the minute. I'm still doing it now, but yeah, they'd be the couple of key things.
So captains, that was all for today. We need to end our session here. Thanks to Mr. Des Buckingham for being with us today. To all of our viewers, thanks a lot for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more such podcasts like this. And until next time, it's goodbye from Armband.